Yeah.
Welcome everybody to the Audit Risk and Governance meeting for Monday, the 26th of February. I can call the meeting open at 5:41 p.m. First item is our attendances and apologies. We have apologies from the Director of Corporate Services, Mr. Fraser Sullivan, external member Jacob Corelli, Councillor Morgan Bias, and Councillor Nathan Bishop. I would also like to acknowledge that the Noongar. I'd like to acknowledge the Noongar people of the Budja, the land that we gather on today. For thousands of years, their connection to country has provided knowledge, guidance, spirituality, and life. We pay our respects to this ongoing connection, as well as to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to advise that this meeting is being audio recorded in accordance with council policy, and no other visual or audio recordings of this meeting of any other means are allowed. Our second item on tonight's agenda is public questions, of which I've received now.
None received, Mr. Presiding Member.
With that, we can move on to deputations, which I've received now.
None received again.
So we can move on to agenda item number 4, declarations of committee members and officers' interests, which I have received now.
I haven't received any. None received.
I have disclosed it before, so I was surprised you guys didn't know I was on the Scouts WA, but I did disclose that as a conflict when it came up last year about the lease.
Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Neary. We can move on to agenda item number 5, which is receipt of minutes of reports, consideration of adoption of recommendation from committee meetings held since previous council meetings. Agenda item 5.1 is the minutes of the previous Audit, Risk and Governance Committee meeting. Agenda item 5.1.1, Special Audit, Risk and Governance meeting from the 4th of December 2023. Do I have a mover? Councillor Duggan, a seconder. President Coles. That anyone opposed to this motion? Motion is carried unanimously. On to agenda item 5.1.2, Audit, Risk and Governance Committee meeting from the 27th of November 2023. Do I have a mover for those minutes? Ms. Newby, and a seconder. Councillor Duggan. Is anyone opposed to this motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us on to agenda item 6, which is reports for consideration. 6.1 is the 2023 compliance audit return. Do we have any questions from the floor? Ms. Newby.
Yes. Look, I wrote down a whole lot, and some of them got answered in the explanation below. It's just disclosure of interest and conflict of interest is really, I think, quite important, because it sort of all goes to the heart of integrity, as Gladys is trying to talk about today. But I just wonder, one was only 3 days late and the other one was a lot later than that. I'm just wondering how the actual non-disclosure came to light. Was it because the person filed it, or do we have a system to make sure that people are lodging these things?
The Acting Director of Corporate Services can answer that question, Mr. Presiding Member.
Thank you, Ms. Newby, for the question. Through the chair, we have a system in place where we send out the primary and annual returns before they are due, so we are well aware where non-compliance may be occurring.
Thank you. It's just, do we review people's decisions that have been made during that gap period?
Thank you for the follow-up question through the chair. Yes, we do, but in the 2 non-compliance situations that we have, particularly the second one that you referenced, the employee was actually not working at the time, so there were no decisions relevant to be reviewed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding 6.1? I did have a quick question, if I may, in regards to point number 1, which was, did the local government comply with its current purchasing policy, which we answered no. It references in our comments that there was the Shire's track compliance with this provision on a regular basis. In 2023, there were instances of non-compliance. How many instances are we looking at?
Thank you, Presiding Member, for the question. Through you, it is noted in the report, so I'm just going to scroll to that section.
I think it's the middle of page 7.
Yes, so in 2023, of 3,273 purchase orders, there was 104 that were found to be non-compliant, which is a 3% non-compliance rate.
Thank you. Ms. Newby.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow-up question from your one. A lot of organisations have a system where they will not pay a supplier unless a purchase order is provided, which kind of solves this type of problem. And I was just wondering whether we have that policy in place here.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Newby. Not strictly, because we do have exceptions in our procurement policy for things like emergency works and subscriptions and other types of purchases. So no, we don't have a strict rule here in that regard.
When one of those instances is found, a memo is required to explain the reason why the purchase order wasn't raised before, and that's then monitored as it goes along.
Thank you.
And I think the demonstration of the reduction from the previous year in the number shows the training is working, and hopefully staff are learning more about that all the time.
Is there any further questions from the floor? There being no further questions, do I have a mover for the officer's recommendations? Sorry, Councillor Duggan and Mr. Newby, happy to second. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is carried unanimously. Takes us to agenda item 6.2, Strategic Risk Registry Quarterly Review Report. Do we have any questions? Ms. Newby.
Right. Risk 3, which is the financial sustainability one. I'm just wondering how we've progressed with control number 7, which is the goal of reducing the percentage of operating costs to revenue. And I'm just asking do we report that as a KPI to council, or whether it's reported internally, because it's pretty hard to have a control if we're not reporting against it. So I'm just wondering about what the KPI is and how we're going against it.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Newby. I wish that Fraser was here to answer the question, probably have it in his mind. What I can say is that from the annual electors meeting when we presented last year's financial statements to the community, we had a slide in there about how all our ratios are going. And whilst our financial health indicator increased on the previous year, the operating surplus ratio, I think from memory, went back 1 point. But if you're happy, I'm happy to see if we can include something in the next audit committee about that. And I've got that information on hand. If that's
yes, that's fine.
The operating surplus ratio is our challenge.
Yes.
As we go with the growth.
Oh, because it affects so many other things. I agree. Another one. This is with risk 2. This is about the workforce, which of course is one of our high red flags, if it was not a red flag, but things. I'm just wondering again, do we report on staff turnover as a KPI? Because one of the things we're trying to do here is retain our workforce. And if we do report on staff turnover, do we compare ourselves to other councils? Because that's one of the key indicators of our ability to retain staff.
We don't currently report on it other than in the annual report. There's some comment about it in the annual report. That's the place we mainly report on that there. In terms of how we compare to others, we compare pretty well to others for the location that we're in. Others are much better than us and others are much worse than us. What we are doing is that our turnover seems to be occurring at lower levels in the organisation, and particularly people that are here less than 2 years for some reason. So we're doing some work with staff in some focus groups about understanding what that is and why that's the case, and then how we can improve that.
I'd say perhaps we should consider it as a KPI that we do have in there that gets, so it's more defined to give a good indication. Oh yes.
Any further questions?
Risk said, James is certainly getting my eyesight a big workout this thing. Anyway, where am I? 7, which is just the environment sustainability. We're waiting for the release of the assessment. I'm just wondering whether it's been considered whether we can have in here is our objective a time period after the release of the report, because we keep pushing the dates out. But I'm just wondering if we say, because in our notes we say we've got the staff ready to do it. I'm just wondering if we could put in here just, we're going to take 2 months to do this after the report, just because at the moment it's just open-ended. That was all, whether that had been considered.
I don't know if you're talking about the point number 9 in the action.
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if the Director of Development Services wants to comment on that, or the. Yep, okay.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, and through you, Mr. Chairman. The latest advice is the second half of this year, but I do recall probably saying the same thing last year from the proponent. So if there was a way of indicating that it certainly will be completed. We'll have 42 days, I think, for the PER once it does come out for making a submission. So we will have to comply with that time frame once it is released. We do assume it is this calendar year, most recent advice from Alcoa.
Well, perhaps we could consider just putting that in there as the target date. There's so many days after you receive that report, so then we know where it was.
So the amendment might be to insert the words 42 days, and then the rest of it would read fine following release of the assessment. Yep.
The next one concerns risk 8, but I think it's probably most more appropriate to discuss it when we look at the Australian Audit report and their comments, but it may well flow back to this document, but it's probably easier to discuss when we look at Santo's report. That's it. I have no more.
Was there any further questions from the floor? President Coles.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Just in relation to risk number 8, which is asset management, I notice that the control rating is inadequate. Is that a typo? And if it's not, how do we make that control rating adequate instead of inadequate, which is all about asset management?
The Acting Director of Corporate Services can start by answering that question.
Thank you for the question, President Coles. Through the chair, those ratings are in accordance with our council policy. So there's a framework in the council policy with definitions. The way to move up from inadequate to adequate, and then I think fully effective is the highest level you can go to. As we complete the actions on the right-hand side and move them over into controls, you then do a reassessment on how you feel that the control environment is operating, and it's at that point that we can increase the level.
If I can ask a subsequent question to the acting director, so the level of risk then is significant or is it high? The fact we've got a control that's inadequate.
Thank you for the question through the chair. So they are separate ratings. Yeah. So the adequate rating is on the control environment and the risk assessment is based on the consequence and the likelihood.
Thank you, Director.
There any further questions from the floor? There being no further questions, Ms. Nibby, you indicated before, would you like to make an amendment or amended motion to include the 42 days?
Yes, please. We can just,
Ms. Newby, are you happy with the wording that's on the screen with the following amendments? Add 42 days and the target date.
yes, I think it's fine. I think it's as simple as that. So we know where we are in that control. Yes.
And so Ms. Newby's happy to move that. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Duggan. Is anybody opposed to the motion? Motion is carried unanimously.
And Ms. Newby, we do need a reason for the difference from the officer recommendation. So a simple sentence. Would that be something like to clarify the timeframes? Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newby. We can move on to agenda item 6.3, which is the asset management audit. Do we have any questions? Councillor Duggan.
Thanks, presiding member. Just on page 20, where we discuss the additional FTE required to get the Shire's asset management policy and asset management strategy and asset management plans in order. I'm assuming that this is a position that's not yet funded, and it's in addition to the recent directorship position that's was passed and supported through council. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Ms. Newby?
Yes, just that if we don't get that FTE approved, I'm a little concerned about this, the management of the assets. I'll just give some background. One of the first meetings that I came to here, when we looked at the accounts, a lot of the assets which had been inherited, if you like, from the council, transferred to the council from developers, hadn't been taken up, which meant there was no maintenance program around them, there was no insurance around them, and we had no risk assessment around any of them. Given things like the asbestos, which has appeared in Sydney on some of these areas, I think it's a really important thing. And I would just, I think, I know I'm supposed to ask a question rather than make a comment, but I think we really need to consider how we recommend to the council that this is so important that we cover off on this. Because I think the risk to the Shire is high, and it comes in under that risk 8 on our risk asset thing. But just knowing what we went through before.
So I can answer Ms.
It's not really a question.
And just to maybe update is that we brought a report to the council meeting in February about actually splitting the infrastructure directorate into 2 and creating an executive manager of operations to deal with operations, waste, fleet, facilities, those sort of things, to actually give the director more time to help focus on infrastructure delivery and capital programs and our asset management plan. So I agree. But as a question from councillor, that's an additional resource in addition to that. But I agree that we need to get our asset management plans up to a certain good point. And that would include 10-year works programs for roads and footpaths and those sort of things.
In culverts.
There any further questions regarding 6.3? There being no further questions, do I have a mover for option 1 and the officer's recommendation? Ms. Nevy? And a seconder, councillor Jarrett. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Motion is passed unanimously. Takes us to agenda item number 7, which is motions of which notice has been given, which there is nil. Agenda item 8 is urgent business, which there is nil. Which brings us to agenda item number 9, which is the closure of the meeting, and I'll call the meeting closed at 3 minutes past 6. Thank you all for your attendance this evening.